Thank you, Sylvie, and welcome everyone to our weekly, we just started this week, but we are going to be doing weekly COVID webinars to help answer your questions. And I am joined today by two very capable colleagues, Corinne Pullman, who's the Senior Vice President of National Affairs and Partnerships in Ottawa, and her title is just a fancy way of saying that she is expert in all things to do with dealing with the federal government, which is obviously critically important to us right now. And Brendan Rolfe, who's one of our business counselors. So we have a number of business counselors across Canada taking your calls. In fact, our volumes are very high right now. We've got about 10 times our normal volumes, and we've proud to say we've taken almost 5,000 calls from business owners. And so Brendan is one of our counselors who's been taking hundreds and hundreds of calls, so he'll be an invaluable resource today as the three of us together try and get answers to as many of your questions as we can. I do want to provide a little bit of context around that and just, I guess, manage expectations a little bit. Everyone is scrambling to get information right now, and in many cases, governments are making announcements without having all of the details worked out. And so in some cases, the answer to your question may be, we don't know yet, but our commitment to you is that we are going to answer as many questions as we can, and we are continuing to update our website regularly. So we're updating our website hourly with new information as it comes to try and get the clarity and the answers that you need. So Sylvia, if you could go to the next slide, we'll just reinforce that that's our commitment. And here is our website link. Our website is a great source of information. I know Brendan has been telling our members that if they bookmark that site, it's a great place to come back to and pretty easy. You just have to go to CFIB-FCEI and then you'll see our COVID information very quickly, and you can get there. And again, we'll get back to you with as many answers to your questions as we can. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we wanted to get to the key topics that you are asking. If you have questions outside of these topics, feel free to ask and we'll try to answer those too. But we're going to go through business closures and temporary layoffs because that's where we're getting the bulk of our questions. And then we're going to pause and answer some of your questions right there because, again, those are two very, very big topics. We'll move on from there and talk about, with April 1st coming up, lease payments have been another big question that we're getting, so we'll give you the latest that we have on paying rent. We'll also cover off government support and where to find information, as well as what we, CFIB, are advocating for on your behalf, and the other information that we have. We're going to spend a moment on dealing with stress just because, this is a stressful situation for everyone, and we are definitely hearing that from business owners across Canada, not surprisingly, on our phone lines. So let's get right to it, and I'm going to start with business closures, and then I'll pass it off to Corinne and to talk about the temporary layoffs, and then we'll open it up to questions, and Brendan will weigh in as well. On the business closure situation, we now have all provinces in a state of emergency, and they're putting more restrictions on business operations. They have been in the last 2 weeks. We don't expect it to get too much more restrictive, but they have been increasingly putting restrictions with regard to business operations. And we now have multiple provinces who have ordered closures of non-essential businesses. Now, there's some variation in what is considered non-essential, so that's one point I want to make, and I'm going to, in a moment, talk about where you can find the information you need about your business and to what degree you can remain open. But one comment I want to make right here is that if you are required to close your business and you can continue operations remotely, then you can do that. You can continue to do that. So for example, CFIB has been required to close its Toronto office, but we are all serving you remotely. So we are here on this webinar, which is why you may hear the odd cat meow in the background or the odd baby noise because we're all working from home. So we're continuing to work and we're able to do that. So if your business is in that situation, you are allowed to do that. That is one question we have been getting. A second big question we've been getting with respect to business closures has to do with, well, what if I need to send someone into, my business has to be closed, but what if I need to send someone into my hairdressing salon, for example, to get some important paperwork that I need, or I need to send an IT person in because we're having a systems issue. And we are saying our best advice on that is use your common sense. Don't schedule employees to go in if you are supposed to be closed, but if you need to send someone in and you're doing that in a reasonable way, that's certainly what we at CFIB are doing. So that's our best common sense advice on that. If we go to the next slide, I'll just show you where you can find the information that you may need on business closures. So this is on our website. On the COVID page, we do have information by province with drop-down menus that will show you exactly what businesses are required to be closed and what the restrictions are. So, for example, in some provinces, restaurants are required to be fully closed, but you can do takeout. In other provinces like Alberta, you can be open at half capacity. So that kind of information is available from the drop-down menus. If you do have, if you're not covered by the list, please send us a question and we will try and get that information for you as quickly as we can. I will say that even in the provinces where there are non-essential businesses are required to be closed, the list of what is allowed to remain operational with respecting social distancing and those other protocols is often quite long. So many provinces have worked to keep businesses open. For example, pet food stores can remain open, but that kind of information is available on our website. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Corinne, who's going to talk a little bit about staffing options, including the big announcement that came out of Ottawa just this morning as a good example of how things are moving in real time about the 75% wage subsidy, which is something that we had lobbied on. So Corinne, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Laura, and good evening, everybody. I wanted to just point out before I jump into the slide that one thing we wanted to just mention to you is that you should have on your screen something called handouts. And that is actually going to be a copy of this entire presentation. So you're welcome to sort of download that and take a look at that on your own or take it with you. But want to just make sure that you're aware of that. Moving on. So when you're obviously thinking about your business and making decisions in this challenging time, clearly if you have staff, this is one of the things that you're thinking about. If your revenue has been dropping dramatically or if you've had to close, there are things that you need to think about in terms of staffing, and here are some options that you may want to think about when you're doing that. First, of course, is that if you're able to still be open and still be able to function, but maybe your staff is staffing or your revenues have gone down, there may be an option for you to keep your staff regardless of the fact that your revenues have gone down and access what is now the 75% wage subsidy. This was a 10% wage subsidy a week ago. That was announced, and now that has been bumped up dramatically to 75% as of today. That was announced. However, we have very little information at this point about how it will work, who will be able to access it, what the criteria will be. And so that's the part, unfortunately, that we wish we could come with more information, but we just don't have it yet. Government has said that they will have those details by early next week. And so as soon as we get them, we will be sharing them with you as well. Other options, of course, are if you can reduce hours of your staff. There's also options in terms of using the EI system. Both WorkShare and Working Well and Claim are ways that you can keep staff while having EI also pay part of their salary, and we'll talk about both of those in a minute. And then, of course, if you have to go to that particular, make that particular decision, there is the fact that you can lay them off. There are two ways that the employee can then get some income support. One is through the employment insurance system. The other is through the new Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which was just announced yesterday. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So if we go to the next slide. I want to just touch a little bit on the Canada Emergency Response Benefit because we do have a bit more details about this as it was announced yesterday. It does replace two previous programs that had been announced a week previous. So they've combined them. There was before an emergency care benefit and an emergency support benefit. They combined them to make it into one benefit. So the Canada Emergency Response Benefit is really meant for anybody who has had to stop working because of COVID-19, whether it's for illness or quarantine, whether it's because of a loss of work or lack of work. It's also available to the self-employed and the business owners themselves who may not have any income coming in. So it's very broad. It's also freelancers, contractors. It's available to a broad swath of people. Essentially, it provides a flat amount of $2,000 per month. That is taxable, however, and you can get it for up to 4 months. And then, of course, it's something that will be available to everyone until October. So that's a good thing as well. It's not yet available. It will become available in the next, we're hoping by around early April, they're telling us. So then the date we've been hearing is April 6th. But what will happen is that you're going to be able to access it through the CRA. There'll be a web portal at CRA that you will be able to register. And from there, you'll be able to get paid once you've been registered after 10 days. You'll be paid every 4 weeks, the amount of $2,000. And that should hopefully help a lot of folks who are finding themselves in a difficult situation right now. Where this is very advantageous, there's people who are not EI eligible. So those are workers who may not have enough hours to actually access employment insurance. And of course, those that are self-employed or contractors who also generally don't have access to employment insurance. That's really who it's meant to help. However, if you have employees who can access EI, they are still also eligible for this one as well. They just have to choose one. You cannot do both at the same time. You have to either choose employment insurance or you have to choose the Canada Emergency Response Benefits. All right, moving on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other types of ways, other things that you can think about as options for staffing. If you do have some work still, but you just don't have enough to keep somebody on full time, there are a couple options where EI can help. One is something called working while on claim. Generally, this happens when somebody is laid off. They then then you find out maybe you have a few hours of work in a week where you need somebody to come in and help out. They can then go on working while on claim, which allows them to actually earn a certain amount of money, generally around, I believe it's $70 before it affects their EI benefit. Once you reach that threshold in terms of work, they start to lose part of the EI benefit. For every $1 they earn from you in earnings, they get clawed back 50 cents in their EI benefit. So it allows them to sort of basically use both the EI as well as wages from you, and allows them to earn a little bit of money and do a little bit of work while still being on EI. The second program, WorkShare, is really for a group of employees. So if you have a number of employees on a shop floor, for example, who are that you want to figure out a way to reduce the amount of work for that group, and they agree, it's actually an agreement between your company, the employees, and Service Canada, and everybody agrees to share that work more broadly between the group, and everybody works a little bit less. Then that is something that can be put into place. You still pay them for the amount of time they are working, the lower amount they're working. EI will then top them up to a higher proportion of their salary, so they won't necessarily lose as much of their income as a result. This one is something that has been extended. It usually is only available for about 38 weeks. How they've doubled the time that people can, or companies can be on the program to over 70 weeks now. However, there is a pretty long application period that tends to take about 30 days if you've never used the program before to get approved. They are trying to find ways to streamline that and make it faster, but that's still the current norm, is 30 days. If you've used the program before, however, they do fast track you and you can probably get into the system fairly quickly. More information about all of this is on our website as well. Moving to the next slide. We want to talk a little bit about what happens when you lay off an employee. And first and foremost, it's really about communicating what you're going to have to do in terms of laying it off somebody, and which is never an easy decision to make or an easy conversation to have. But I think it's important that you clearly communicate your decision to them. You need to really explain why this is happening, and of course with COVID-19 and the impacts it's having on your business, that should be fairly clear, but I think it's still really important to tell them and help them understand it. And it's also important to talk about your intentions. Is there an opportunity for you to bring them back once your company is more financially viable? Then you should be sharing that information with them, and if your plans to hopefully bring them back when things improve. And of course, you have to make sure that you talk to them about applying for employment insurance or the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, whatever makes more sense in the context of that employee. Moving on to the next slide. So what's some of the administrative components of laying off an employee? Well, probably the biggest thing is having to complete what we call a record of employment, or ROE. Generally speaking, once an employee has gone 7 days without any earnings, that's known as an interruption of earnings. Then that means that they now have to be given a record of employment. You then have 5 days, you have to within 5 days file that record of employment. So that's 5 days after they've gone through the 7 days. You don't have to wait that long if you know that they're going to be laid off, but that's sort of the definition that's defined, that is used by Service Canada. But to access and get a record of employment can be a challenge right now. And I know many of you and many other business owners across Canada have been trying to get these records of employment and have pretty much flooded Service Canada to a point that they have not been able to respond adequately. There are 2 ways to get a record of employment. One is to call them and have them send it to you by mail, but I know it's even difficult to get into their phone systems, and of course that takes time. The other is through the electronic ROE, an online system, which again, if you've never used it before, you have to go in and give some of your credentials, but even then you're not in right away. They then require they will then send you a code, which they send in the mail, so it can then take another week or 2 before you can finally get into the system and file a proper record of employment. We would still encourage you to use the electronic version. Both of them, both processes or both means of getting a record of employment, unfortunately, are lengthy right now. But if you do it on the electronic way, it will be processed much more quickly than if you do it through the paper version. And so we would encourage you, despite the time it takes to get the code, that might be the better option for you. We are actively asking the government to eliminate the double verification system or the need to get a code so that we can get these things processed more quickly. That is one of our lobbying asks at the moment. Once this record of employment is filed, however, that's when the employee can start getting their employment insurance. So it's really important that does get filed. The employee can start the process of applying for employment insurance before the ROE is ready, but they can't actually get it until the record of employment is filed with Service Canada. So once you have that record of employment, it can be a little bit confusing because there's all kinds of different codes to use. So here are the most common codes that we've seen to be used because of this current situation. A code A is what you would use, of course, when you're laying somebody off because there's a shortage of work or temporary business closure. So this is probably the most common in terms of what will be used for a layoff. However, if somebody is absent due to illness or quarantine, it would be a different code. That would be code D, which would indicate they would get a different type of employment insurance. They would be more focused on the sickness insurance of employment insurance. And then code H is the work sharing, which we've already talked about. But I do want to emphasize through all of this that you should not be putting any comments in the comment box of the record of employment. Why? Is because this actually slows down the processing of the record of employment, because it forces them to review that particular record of employment manually and makes it longer for the employee to get unemployment insurance.
And Corinne, I'll just stop you there because we had some questions from our last webinar. There was some confusion about this. I think some of the payroll processors were actually suggesting putting that code information in, and that has changed. But our best advice is do not put any comments in because they'll end up in a longer queue. So I just wanted to clarify that for everybody, that we understand you may have been given some conflicting advice prior to this, but this is the advice, Corinne, that you've determined straight from Service Canada.
Correct. That's even on Service Canada's own website now. That is their own advice to people filling out the ROE now to help them also process much more quickly the influx of forms that they're getting. We'll move to the next page or the next slide. I just want to mention one other code, and that's the code N, and that's for leave of absence. So this is really to be used when an employee says they're unable to work because they have children, for example, and the schools are now closed and they have no ability to give them daycare, or there may be something that they feel that they can't be at work that is unrelated to your business, for example, or unrelated to COVID-19. So these are the types of things that can be used for code N. And so all kinds of information, of course, all of this is up on our website in much more detail if you have an opportunity to look at that. I think we'll stop there and I'll pass it over to you, Laura, for questions.
Thank you. And so, Fabricio, we hear you. We are going to slow down and pause right now for questions. We know we've covered a lot of information here, and so we're going to get to some questions and cover some of this ground again as we go through some of those questions. So I'm going to start with this one. We have an employee that has requested to go on EI even though they have not been required to be in quarantine, and we're not laying them off. They want to go on EI for preventative measures to protect their family from contracting COVID-19. And Brendan, I know this is a question we're getting a lot. The question is, will they be eligible for EI? So they're not required to go on EI, but they feel they need to. Will they be eligible for EI? And I'm guessing a related question for Ray on this would be what code to use for EI for that ROE when that's issued.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Laura. This is a very common question we're getting, actually. And the answer to that is that unless they are required to take care of a child, as Corinne mentioned, who would normally be in school, or take care of a sick family member or loved one, chances are they will not be able to collect EI. And Laura, you're correct. Code N, as in November, will be used for leave of absence. That said, what we are advising is for members to advise their employees to apply for the CERB in this case. Now, there's no guarantee either that they'll be qualified for CERB, as it is completely a voluntary leave of absence. I should also mention that in some provinces, they have put in emergency employment standards legislation where an employee cannot lose their position if they voluntarily self-isolate, even in absence of symptoms. So that's something important to note, as likely their job is protected. However, you will put them on a leave of absence, which is code N. And if they are asymptomatic, have no one to take care of, then chances are they won't have access to EI. And it's a coin toss whether or not they'll be able to access a CERB program at this time.
Okay, so D has a question here. If an ROE has been submitted, does that mean the employee cannot apply for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit?
That's a good question. Go ahead, you know the answer.
Yeah, my understanding is they've already applied, or the ROE has already been submitted. The expectation is that they'll continue on the employment insurance stream. And it's sort of going forward that there is that option to go for one or the other, but maybe Brendan, you might have some other information around that.
No, that's, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say, is they can't be on both. No. But certainly if the process has been started for EI benefits, then continue on that process. Not for least of which is that there are delays for both. Well, likely there will be delays for CERB program, but there are delays right now at the government level processing EI applications right now. So if it's begun, continue on that path.
Right. So, and to clarify, because there were quite a few questions on this, you are not eligible for both. So pick a stream and stick with it is our best advice. But that brings us to our next question, which is the better stream? So Jack has the question, which is better for our team, lay off and collect EI or the CERB fund? And so he goes on to say, I understand CERB lasts 4 months, but it was stated earlier in the webinar, it was good until October 3rd, which is about 6.5 months. Please advise. And I know I'll start by saying that we are putting together some materials. I checked with our BR counselors earlier, and we are putting together a kind of a comparison sheet for CERB and EI, because this is a question we're getting a lot. But Corinne, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, again, this was only announced yesterday, so we are still working out many of those details. My understanding is the reason that they have it, they're keeping the program in place until October is partly because some people may not get laid off till later in the process. I believe it's my understanding that you can only have it for 4 months within that 6-month period. So I think that's a key piece of that I wanted to reiterate. But I'll let Brendan talk about what are the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Corinne. And I want to outline as well that the government has stated that those who are qualified for EI benefits should continue to apply for those, whereas the CERB fund is more oriented towards those who might not otherwise qualify for EI benefits. And just for those out there, the basic guidelines to qualify for EI is you must have worked at least 600 insurable hours over the last 52 weeks. And this does vary from region to region, but this is the basic guideline. So the pluses to applying for regular EI benefits is that the top end is a little bit higher. So employees can earn 55% of their regular wages up to a maximum of $23.50 per month, whereas the CERB fund tops out at $2,000 per month. On the flip side, due to the backlogs associated right now with applying for EI and given the volume that's coming in with ROEs, there are delays that are to be expected when applying for regular EI benefits, whereas we see with the CERB fund that there'll be an online portal, we're told, that employees will be able to apply through, and the application process, they're very expectantly and very, shall we say, not necessarily considering regular timelines, will take about a week. So we're thinking, and we'll see as we go, that those may be the pros and cons to each of these aspects.
Great. Here's a more straightforward question. Can you lay off just some of your workers, ones that don't work from home? And that's a question coming from Jeff. I think that's a fairly straightforward one to answer, Brendan.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, you can lay off workers as your business needs dictate. Unless, of course, you operate a unionized work environment, in which case you need to refer back to the collective bargaining agreement for those directions.
Great. Here's another interesting question. This one comes from Wine. If you are using a payroll processing company, can't you use them to create the ROE?
Yes, you should be able to use them to create the ROE. So our partnership, we have a partnership with PayWorks, and they are doing that all for free for our members who are with PayWorks. So that is usually a standard part of most payroll providers. They may have a fee associated with it, I don't know, but they all should be able to do that for you.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Gary's question. Gary posed an early question in the webinar, and this one concerns the banks. So how have the banks been concerning the BCAP initiative? I know it's early days, Corinne, and we're hearing some different things from members about the banks. Do you want to share some of what we're hearing with the participants?
Yeah, so the what they're calling, I guess, the Business Credit Availability Program. They've been rolling it out gradually, and there have been different components to it. In fact, today was some more components of this Business Credit Availability Program, which will be delivered through the banks, but basically guaranteed by the government. We've heard mixed reviews. I think some people are having success in getting the banks to provide them with the loans that they need. But we've also heard others who've had quite a bit of difficulty with some banks and in terms of their criteria and their and what they're assessing when they're looking at giving those loans. So that is one we're actually going to do a bit more investigation into. And so if you have stories to tell, if you have something that you're experienced, we'd like to hear about it, because that will certainly help us in trying to get across to the banks themselves and to government some of the challenges that are being faced. But I will say today they did announce a program called the Emergency Business Account, which is going to be part of this credit availability as well, and it's going to be launched, I guess, fairly soon, if not already, which will allow businesses to get up to $40,000 in loans or line of credit, interest-free from their financial institution. It will be guaranteed by the government. So the idea is that hopefully the banks will be more forthcoming with that kind of money, given that the government themselves are backing it. And the nice piece to it is that they're actually going to also forgive about 25% of that. So if you get the full 40,000, you actually can probably get 10,000 of that. You don't have to pay back if you can pay back the rest of the loan by the end of 2022. So there are some advantages there. This was just announced today, so we'll hopefully have more to share on that very soon. But Please tell us about your experiences with your bank, if it's both positive or negative. That helps us to help make it easier for other businesses who may be trying in the future.
Okay, so we're going to move on in a moment, but there are Laura, Karen, and Mark all have questions about the 75% wage subsidy. So Laura is wondering generally about the subsidy and what percentage of salary we're looking at paying, which 75% is what was announced just a few hours ago. Karen is wondering if we're continuing to work as much as possible, can we still take advantage of the 75% wage benefit that was announced today? I believe the answer to that is yes, but I'm going to turn that to you in a moment, Corinne, after going through Mark's question, which is, are the thresholds the same for the 75% subsidy as the 10%, and specifically the 15 million in taxable capital? And I know we're still waiting for details on that, but these are the kinds of questions that are coming in around the 75% wage subsidy. So I don't know if you want to add a little bit more to your thoughts on that, Corinne.
Yeah. We don't know a lot, unfortunately, and so all those details are still to come that you're asking about. And we, as I said, we're hoping to get those Monday or Tuesday. I'm hopeful that the only thing we do know is that some of the criteria that will be included will be that you have to show that you've had a loss in revenues of some percentage. They don't tell us what that is, if it's 10, 15, 20, 30, 40%, I don't know, due to COVID-19. So there will be some criteria where you have to show that your revenues have gone down to a certain amount in order to use the wage subsidy. Other than that, I don't know whether the $15 million taxable capital limit will remain or be removed, or will it be stricter or not strict? I don't know. So those are the types of details that we're waiting for. I'm presuming it will probably have a similar cap in that regard. And we also are still waiting to understand whether it'll be available to sole proprietor, unincorporated as well as incorporated. The previous one was just for incorporated businesses. So we ourselves still have lots of questions. We also don't know if there'll be a cap per employee as there was with the 10% wage subsidy. So all of those details are the things that we're already asking government. And so hopefully we'll have answers Monday or Tuesday, and we'll put them up on our website immediately when we do.
Perfect. So I'm going to move us along, but we're going to come back to your questions in a few minutes. We're just going to cover off the rest of the content for the webinar because there are a few other topics here. And one of them relates to April 1st and lease payments, utility payments. Anything to do with fixed cost is starting to come up now as employers are figuring out what to do on the wage side. They're now shifting their attention to the fixed cost side. And we're also looking at this very carefully and doing some advocacy work along these lines. But Brendan, I'm going to give it over to you for a few minutes just to talk very briefly about, some of the things you can do if you're worried about your upcoming lease payment.
Yeah, absolutely. So unless you're a manufacturer of toilet paper or hand sanitizer, chances are your revenue streams have been affected negatively, or you've had to temporarily close your doors. So then the question is, how can I afford my expenses when my suppliers, when my landlord are still asking for their share? So the first thing we're advising to do is to look at your contract with the other party. So unlike your relationship with your employees, there isn't much or any government legislation that's going to determine how you can proceed. And what this means is that your contract contains the terms and conditions of your agreement with the supplier or landlord. Now, what if there isn't a clause in the contract that addresses disaster type situations like a pandemic? Well, then this means there's room for negotiation. And even if there is a clause within the contract, there's still room for negotiation because we're on unprecedented grounds. So what we're saying is that before you go and try to negotiate a new either deferral of payment or new payment terms, is that you get a good sense of your business finances and understand what sort of payment plan you can afford so that you can bring them a solid number to work from. If there isn't a negotiation that's going to be possible because the other party is not being reasonable, you may want to consider legal support at this time or legal consultation, but do call into business resources at CFIB first, just so we can perhaps save you from having to make a call to a lawyer and those associated fees. Now, what if you can't afford to pay a bill that's come from your supplier or your landlord? So in this case, Sylvie, do you mind advancing one more screen so everybody can see? Or one more slide? Perfect. So in this case, we're asking that you do speak to your commercial insurance provider. Now, some provisions within your insurance may address something called business interruption insurance payments. And so basically what this addresses is potential for disaster that might affect the way that you operate your business. Now, I'll be honest, not a lot of business insurance plans do include this clause, but some do. And so we're saying if you're unsure, do contact your business insurance provider and ask them specifically about that. Once again, it's a business interruption insurance payment clause. We're also asking at this time that you do speak with your financial institution, be it a bank, be it a credit union. They have indicated that they will work on a case-by-case individual basis with businesses to discuss whether or not you can defer mortgage payments or other financial support that they can offer during this time so that your loan through them doesn't sink your business.
Thanks, Brendan. And I'll just underscore that we're actively lobbying on this file right now. Brendan mentioned that if you do need to talk to your landlord, and try and find some kind of agreement that works, that obviously is preferable to just not saying anything, because communication is very important in these circumstances. I think the Nova Scotia government has a form that is sort of an agreement for deferral between landlords and tenants that may be very useful in regards to this, and we're working to get that up on our website and to get some more Q&As on this specific topic on our website. So please let us know if that would be valuable. And before I move on to the key federal government support measures, Corinne, there's an interesting question that relates to this from Lorna on, or that's on a related topic, which is any word on whether the credit card companies will be putting a hold on interest or at least lowering the interest rate. And I know we were hearing rumors a few days ago that the credit card companies were looking at doing something. Do we have any updates on what's going on with the credit card companies? I know we're actively talking to them, but any new word on that?
No, but I do know that the government apparently has been putting pressure on them as well to do something about credit card interest rates at this point in time, especially given how low our Bank of Canada rate is at the moment. So I think that potentially could be something we might see in the coming days. But right now, that doesn't seem to have gotten anywhere. We're also working with the credit card companies on merchant fees. So those are also an area that, could potentially help a little bit in terms of costs for small business employers. So I think that's, we were hoping to see some reductions coming in sort of April and May. Unclear right now whether those reductions will happen, so we'll have to just wait and see. Some may not, but there's certainly a lot of uncertainty at the moment around some of those things, and we're hoping to get more certainty in the next week or so on both the interest rates that you pay for your credit card, also merchant rates that merchants have to pay who actually accept credit cards as well.
Great.
All right. Should I talk about federal government?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So we've talked about many of these already, so I won't go into too much detail, but the 75% wage subsidies, we'll have more information come Monday or Tuesday. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or we like to call CERB, if you ever hear that term from us, that's what we're talking about. We've spoken about that quite at length. And the nice thing about that, I will say, is that's the first income support measure that was announced yesterday that includes the self-employed. So that was a group that we had seen had been a big gap in the previous announcements. So we were very pleased that the government filled that gap to a little bit by including them in this new emergency response benefit for those business owners who have found no income coming in anymore. There is at least something now for them as well. The other thing that we haven't talked about, however, is that the federal government has deferred tax filing and remittances. For income tax, they did that last week. That has now been moved for taxpayers, which is normally April 30th until June. And for businesses, it's been moved now till after August 31st. So income tax has been deferred. They also today announced the deferral of sales taxes and import duties. So those are also now being deferred. You don't have to pay your sales taxes or if you're an importer of goods, your import duties until end of June. So that is a bit of a deferral as well, and will, according to the federal government, will put about $30 billion back into the pockets of businesses across Canada as a result of that one move. So we can hold on to some of that money for a little longer and hopefully help you get through the tough times you may be facing right now. We also talked a little bit about some of the business credit availability program. I think there's a few different programs, and I did speak already to the Canadian Emergency Business Account that came out today. That is that $40,000 interest-free loan that you can go to your bank and try to see if they'll provide for you if you need it. There's also a portion of that that could be forgivable if you're able to pay off the loan by the end of 2022. There are other programs as well, though. They're also providing more guaranteed loans. These are not interest-free, however, into the system that are meant to sort of help small, medium-sized companies. Both Export Development Canada and Business Development Canada are sort of behind those loans as well, but they are delivered through your financial institution. So if you need more than $40,000, for whatever reason, there is going to be more money out there available. So go talk to your bank to find out more about whether or not that's something that you can access as well. We keep all this information up on our website. We're updating as much as we can. So again, can't reinforce it enough, the importance of checking the website on a daily basis for new information. The next slide is a bit of a dated slide now, I'll have to say, even though the data is only about a week old. But weekly now we're doing a survey of our members to get sort of a sense of the impact of COVID-19 on the businesses. And this information has become hugely valuable to policymakers. They are eating it up every week when we are producing this information and using it in their decision making that's been going on. And I want to thank anybody who's filled out one of those surveys. It's very, very helpful for us and very, very useful in terms of being able to influence government and help them make the decisions that they are. This particular question has to do with what do our members want to see the federal government do more of in the future. As you can see, only 1% say that there's really nothing further for them to do. So clearly there's a lot more to do. Today's announcement covered off a few of these, which is great. And that's why it's a bit dated now. But the number one right at the top is delaying any planned tax increases. And that is one they have not yet done anything about. So April 1st will be the next carbon tax increase in 5 provinces in which there is a federal carbon tax. They're not going to be, at this point, it looks like, they're going to move ahead with that, despite the fact that one province that is not part of the federal carbon tax system, British Columbia, has already stated that they will defer their carbon tax. So we're hoping that they'll still maybe rethink this. However, at this point in time, it looks like we're going to see a tax increase on April 1st. Also, the other one we're talking about is Canada Pension Plan. As you know, they've been going up. There is a planned increase coming again in January of next year. While it may seem far away right now, we do believe that we're still going to be perhaps recovering, or it may be difficult. So we want them to rethink that because it's such a big hit to employment when you have to make those employment decisions. Most of the rest of these they've touched on to a certain degree at this point in time. So we will leave it at that, and then we'll move it over to Laura to talk about some of the provincial initiatives.
Great. And Corinne, before we move on, there are a couple of questions with respect to the HST remittance, which is due in March. So I wonder if you could cover that off again. The effective start date for sales tax filing extensions is one question. And actually, that seems to be, there are a couple questions about that.
Yeah, it's my understanding, and I'll have to confirm that, and I can maybe do that while we're on the call, that those deferrals are until June 30th. So if you are a monthly filer, you've got amounts that you've collected for February, March, and April, then those can all be deferred until June 30th now. If you're a quarterly filer, that would have been that you would have been that January through March 31st reporting period. That can now be deferred until June 30th as well. And if you're an annual filer and you normally pay in March, April, or May, you can then defer that as well until June 30th. So that's sort of how they're, so it really depends on the type of filer you are. If you're quarterly, annually, or weekly, then there's different, but it seems like anything going back to February, if you're monthly, is can be deferred now until June.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, I will shift to just spend a moment on what's happening provincially. And so provincially, there's an alphabet soup of taxes with deferrals now. So PST, EHT in British Columbia, WCB, school taxes, corporate taxes. So many provincial governments have announced tax deferrals, and the details of that by province are available on our website, and we're keeping that up to date as those announcements come forward. There have also been some provinces that have announced delays to planned tax increases. That was something that early on the surveys we were doing of our membership came out as something that was very important to don't do any further harm by increasing taxes. So the carbon tax in British Columbia, for example, there's a delay to the planned increase of that tax. Alberta is canceling its education tax increase, although the federal government is still going forward with its planned carbon tax increase, as far as we know as of today. Property tax reductions. So some have announced property tax reductions. British Columbia has cut its school tax rate in half. This is something that we're turning our attention to in a much more concerted way right now, because we're hoping that property tax reductions can then help with some of those concerns over the fixed cost payments like lease payments, particularly as we would be asking, of course, that landlords would pass on any property tax relief to their tenants. So that's going to be an important measure, I think, going forward. Some municipalities have also announced deferrals to the portion of the property tax that is under their control. So the City of Vancouver, for example, I think Moose Jaw has announced some deferrals, and we're working on making sure we have an up-to-date list of those municipalities as well. And then some provinces have put in place measures for additional relief funds, stopgap cash programs for employees, and in some cases they're covering the self-employed as well. So what the provincial governments are doing is looking at where the gaps are between on the federal coverage. In many cases, that's what we're hearing, and then looking to fill in those gaps. But again, by province, we have more information on our website. I'll just briefly flash you the slide on the next slide, what we have asked for based on your survey responses. And you can see there, for example, that delay any planned increased taxes, which just makes common sense, of course, but that was coming up as very high on our list, and we have achieved some of that at the provincial level. Just come in behind Corinne and say that these surveys that we're doing every week are super important. So we do the surveys on Friday. I think the next one should be hitting your mailboxes soon. We had over 10,000 responses to the last one that we did over last weekend, and by Monday we had put the information like this into a deck for policymakers, and we had a call with we had over 100, I think, policymakers from across Canada on that call. They're very, very hungry for the information that they're getting from you. I've had many assistant deputies and deputies say this is terrific. It's complementing the anecdotal information that we're getting. And of course, you know, it's better if governments are basing their policy not just on anecdotes and what they're seeing and hearing, but on a large group of responses from small business owners. So thank you to all members who have been participating in these surveys. And please know that we are, as Corinne said, reading the comments. We are reading it, and we are using it in real time with policymakers. So very, very important. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit now from what's going on at the federal and provincial level to additional resources, because we have many of our partners reaching out saying, how can we help small business at this time? And we're making those resources available as well. We know about 25% of our members have said, I'm not online, but I'd like to figure out how to get online, for example. So we're also working that angle of the problem. Corinne, over to you.
Great, thank you. So as Laura said, our partners are stepping up, and a lot of other large organizations have actually contacted us in the last couple of weeks to say they want to help as well. So we're going to start putting that information out to business owners so that you can see what potentially, if there's something there that you think could help your business. With a quarter of our members telling us that they could be selling online but are not yet, we wanted to make sure that they knew about free resources such as Shopify has an e-commerce platform that they are making available for free for 3 months. So those are the types of things we want to make sure business owners are aware of. We're going to make sure that whatever we post there is going to be actually helpful during this challenging period, and potentially be cost-free so that it gets businesses able to potentially find some place to get revenue. The other is ShipTime, which is a full partner of ours. They already provide 40% discounts on delivery, shipment and delivery, and given that that's become a more important way for people to get their products to their customers, we want to make sure that we can continue to do that. They are going to come out with even more discounts beyond the 40% just for this period to help out as much as they can, and we'll have more information about that up on our website soon. We'll have a special section dedicated to just these types of offers that we know are out there that we think could be helpful for some small businesses. So look out for that. It's not up there yet, but it should be up there shortly. Thanks, Laura.
Great. So if we move along, we're going to just touch on a topic that I know that many of us have talked about, which is dealing with stress. I was talking to one of my colleagues in Quebec yesterday who said that it was all over the media. They're psychologists on the radio lines, and the best advice they were giving is limit your exposure to the news. But some of the things that we want to emphasize too is that you're not alone. Everybody, business owners are all in the same boat, scrambling, trying to get the information they need and apply for the programs. Everyone here at CFIB is dedicated to doing everything we can to help you get through this crisis and get your answers to your questions, and also to help the business recover after this is over. And I'm going to turn it over to Brendan just to say a few more words about that, and then we'll close out the content of what we have to cover and really get to as many of your questions as we can. We will likely go over, but we will cover the main content of the webinar within the hour, and obviously understand if people have to drop off, and I'll just say again that we will get you answers to your questions.
Absolutely. And in a past life, I was a small business owner in Vancouver, and when things were going well, man, you were flying high, but when things are tough, it's a very lonely feeling being a business owner. But I do want to emphasize that the plane doesn't land without the pilot. And what I mean by that is you have to focus for a second on self-care. Right now, you're thinking about your employees, you're thinking about your business, you're probably thinking about your family, but none of that is possible without you. And so I just want to remind you to take a second away from the media, as Laura said. Take a second to go outside and of course, maintain social distancing. Take a deep breath, go do a hobby, take just a little bit time for yourself, just to consider your own feelings, your own stress level, and do what you need to do to put yourself in a good headspace. And please don't hesitate to contact our Business Resources Department. We take about between 40 and 50,000 calls per year, and our business counselors, they understand where you're feeling and where you're at right now, and we get it, and we want to talk to you. And if you feel like you can't talk to anybody else, that's absolutely what we're here for, and we'll do everything we can to help you and support you as well as your business. So please don't hesitate to give our Business Resources a call.
Great, and so we'll move on to these are just some resources for dealing with stress. We also have a bunch of other resources in the appendix, so just a reminder that you can access that just on the right-hand side of your screen, and feel free to copy it, print it, whatever you need to do. So I'll just close out before we get back to questions to remind people that there are a number of CFIB resources available, and we're doing a weekly Sylvia, if you could just go back a slide. We're doing a weekly e-news update. So we typically do a monthly update, but we've changed that to weekly. And this is a bit of a summary of everything so that you know there's just so much going on. There's so many pieces of information. We wanted to pull it together in one place. Our website, www.cfib.ca. And on the previous slide, there's also the helpline number for our business counselor, and you can hear Brendan's fantastic. We've got counselors like that across Canada, and we've shifted some additional resources into our helpline so we can get back to you faster. So I'll just close out with our commitment to you. As this situation evolves, obviously, we're all very committed to making sure that our website is up to date. I'll repeat probably for the 10th time, but I just want you to know it is stressful not having answers to questions, so we are very committed to getting back to you. We understand that, and we are committed to getting back to you with those answers. And our biggest commitment of all is the commitment that we made 50 years ago when our founder started CFIB, which is that we will never stop fighting on behalf of independent business. We have an informal motto that we never give up and we never go away, and certainly we're putting that, we're very much living up to that when it comes to this current situation we're in. And with that, that covers the main content from the webinar. I know we covered a lot and we covered it very quickly. I'm going to get to as many questions as I can, and we'll stay for another 10 or 15 minutes to answer as many of the questions we can, and then we'll get back to any of those folks that we haven't been able to answer. So going back to the questions, and I apologize, I can't see the names anymore of the questions, so I'll read the question, and I won't know yet who asked it. I might have done something on my screen here to make that happen. But one of the participants is asking about whether there's any word on the minimum wage increase in BC that will happen on June 1st. The answer to that is not yet, but as you could see from the question that we asked our members, that is on the list, and it's helpful that you're asking that question because we will be able to tell the BC government that we are getting asked that question, and so we're hoping that we will have a delay to any increases in minimum wages. That's something we're asking all provinces to do at this time. Another question, do these federal incentives apply to small grocery stores that have remained open? Corinne, there are a number of questions around this, and obviously I think the wage subsidy is for those that continue to work, but do you want to make any comments on that? What happens if you're remaining open? What federal help is available?
Well, certainly. I mean, the wage subsidy will likely apply if you've had a drop in revenue. Now, as a grocery, maybe you haven't, but maybe you have. I guess it really depends on where you are and what you sell. But there will likely be a criteria around requirements to have some certain drop in revenue before you can get the wage subsidy. However, some of the loan programs would be available to you. I don't think necessarily that you have to have had a drop, a big drop in revenue, or you've had to have close the shop. Those types of, for example, the interest-free loan that I talked about may be available to you, but again, we don't have all the details, so I don't want you to think that I'm absolutely sure about this, because I'm not, but my suspicion is that kind of thing could be available to you as well. So those are the types of things that we'll have to get more details around, but it really, I think, ultimately stems around whether you've had a drop in revenue due to COVID-19 that will make you eligible for some of these subsidies and programs.
Great, and we're still getting quite a few questions on the, understandably, because this is breaking news as of today, but on the deferral of sales taxes. So, this comment is the deferral of sales taxes does not include GST, correct? That changed today, Corinne. Yes,
that does include GST. So the deferral of sales tax is now part of what you don't have to pay. And in those provinces where an HST exists as well, it's both GST and HST. So those have been deferred now until the end of June. You don't have to pay them or remit any paperwork until the end of June for the periods sort of in advance of that. So it depends on how often you file, but anything from February on, you won't have to pay that until the end of June.
Okay, great. And that answers another question we had here, which is, do you still have to file on time? But you're saying that the filing and the payment is end of June.
That is my understanding. So again, we'll probably try and confirm that, but they've also delayed most filings of most types of taxes until some of them are May, some of them are June. It depends on the type of filing, but most of the paperwork associated with whatever type of taxes you're dealing with, whether it's partnerships or trusts or whatever, have all been deferred. So we'll get that list up on our website so you can see it as well.
And this is an interesting question, which we also got on our last webinar, which is what qualifies a business as a small business, number of employees or income of business. And I think that that's because there's not a lot of details yet in terms of some of these announcements regarding what qualifies you. But any comments you can make that might be helpful at this point on that, Corinne?
Yeah, the only thing, again, we'll have to wait and see what they say next week, but the only criteria under the old wage subsidy program, which was a 10% wage subsidy program, was that you had to have a taxable capital of under $15 million. So that was the criteria. So it was more based on that, and so it would allow some businesses that may be a little bit larger, but still not necessarily with lots of taxable capital to take advantage of some of these programs. However, we'll have to wait and see what the decision is. You also have to be a Canadian-controlled private corporation. You have to be what they call a CCPC, which means that unincorporated, at least under the old wage subsidy program, were not included. However, we're certainly advocating for that to be broadened out to include them as well.
Couple more questions on the 75% wage benefit. Do you have some guidelines for a partnership in the 75% wage benefits? I don't think those details are available yet. We're waiting for those on Monday, so check our website. Do you have to complete a form to receive the 75% subsidy? My guess is that you will have to complete a form. This is government that we're dealing with here, but we don't have those details yet, right, Corinne?
No, we have no details along those lines. I suspect it'll be quite different than what the 10% wage subsidy would have been, because that was based on tax remittances that you give, and they just don't, there isn't enough there for them to do that. So I suspect it'll be a whole different process, and we just don't know what that is yet.
Yeah. So another question here is a fitness facility, climbing gym in BC. How long should I be expected to close? What are the benchmarks for easing social distancing for business? So I'll take a crack at this one, and then Brendan, you might have some more to add. But we're really feeling, obviously, for those facilities that have been asked to completely close, and we will be looking at what additional support can be put in place for businesses that have been forced to completely shut their doors. In terms of how long, there's no guidelines on that yet. We're working on that. I know I have heard from those in the BC government that they're expecting, they're thinking that the peak of this will be mid-April, but there's no information on when businesses will be open again. I will say that in terms of the information I provided earlier around business closures, that's also going to be as things start to change and businesses are allowed to reopen. That is where we will be keeping that information. And in terms of benchmarks for easing social distancing for businesses, we're looking at working with workers' compensation boards across Canada to get some guidelines in place for businesses to help with that. Brendan, did you want to add anything to that answer that I provided?
That was totally encompassing. Yep, no, I have nothing further to add.
Okay. Here's a question for you, Brendan. Would post-secondary students who would normally work part-time while not in school qualify for support?
Support in what fashion? So as if they would apply for EI, or this might be under the CERB program. So as far as we know, as long as they meet the necessary thresholds, they should qualify for support. And the necessary thresholds, of course, is how many insurable hours you've worked in the last year. If you meet that 600 hours worked in the last 52 weeks, chances are you should be able to qualify for benefits. That said, there have been no emergency provisions that I'm aware of that have come forward and stated that they would be eligible or ineligible. Under normal circumstances, you're correct, they would be ineligible to collect EI because it's assumed that most high school students who work part-time are living with their parents. Corinne, have you heard anything to the contrary?
No, I haven't, but the emergency response benefit, there is criteria around you have to have earned at least $5,000 in the past year in order to receive it, and you have to have gone 14 days uninterrupted without income. So they may be able to access that if they do get, if they fall into those categories. So again, if it's a high school student who didn't make $5,000 in the last year, then they probably wouldn't be able to access that. But if they did, they may be able to get the emergency response benefits.
Great. Okay, another one here on the ROE. I went online to apply for ROE Web, and it's been a week. The problem is that my registration needs authentication. Only this morning I received a return call from Service Canada, but unfortunately she could not help me. Since then, I managed to find an old paper ROE. Should I use this or not? Should I wait until next week to get more info on the 75% government is offering? Note, the employee is hourly paid and does not get more than $1,000 biweekly. So I'm imagining, Corinne, there are going to be a lot of employers in this situation who are wondering whether they're in the process of maybe laying off and waiting for the ROE, and then they're wanting to know the details of the 75% wage subsidy before making a decision. And I'm hearing a second question here, which is, you know, they're not getting their online. Should they submit a paper one, which is a question we've had before. So, Corinne, maybe I'll go to you first and then go to Brendan on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's, again, this goes back to the details that we're still waiting for. We do know that we have business owners also looking, who have already laid off people who now, because of the 75% wage subsidy, are looking to bring them back. And the way the language being used by the government today seemed to indicate that that would maybe be allowed. But what we don't know is that when that wage subsidy would it start from before they laid them off, because this wage subsidy is retroactive to March 15th, or would it only start from the time they hired them back? If you're in the process already, or if you haven't submitted the ROE yet, you might want to wait till Monday or Tuesday to see if that's something that can work for you. So as long as you haven't filed it with them yet, you may want to just, if you can, hold on until Monday or Tuesday and see if that is a more workable solution for you. Then I would probably suggest you do that. But if you're already in the process, that's one we'd have to probably get some more. If you've already submitted it, but it hasn't sort of gone through, that's probably one we'd have to try to get some information from government on as to what your options might be in that point, if you can then flip out of it and go back to the wage subsidy. I don't know, Brendan, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that individual circumstance for the question that was mentioned, I would say, you know, a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. So if you're waiting for your authentication code, and for everyone's knowledge out there who's listening, basically, if you don't have an ROE online account, you apply and then the government sends you a code via mail, and then you have to enter that code back into your account to activate it before you can actually submit ROEs. And so that's what our member here is waiting on, is that authentication code to get to her. And I'd say the bird in the hand in this case is that paper ROE. And so if you have not already started submitting the ROE, which you couldn't have without the authentication code, I would say, you know what, if you can get that ROE in paper started right now, it may be to your employee's benefit to get that in there sooner rather than later, because there's no telling when that code will get back to you. Generally, the wait time is not more than a few days to a week. Under the certain circumstances and extenuating circumstances, it's really hard to tell in regards to when you will actually get that code. So you'll have to make that decision yourself. However, if you can get that ROE submitted today or mailed today, that might be better for you and for your employee.
Great, thanks, Brendan. Another question, what happens if you cannot bring your employee back by the end of 13 weeks? And so this is an interesting one. We've been dealing with this with respect to the employment standards across Canada, and we are looking at, if it is going to go out beyond 13 weeks, making sure that the coverage will cover the period of the challenging times we're in, rather than some arbitrary time frame. So that's something we're working on. I don't know, Corinne, or Brendan, if there's anything else you'd like to add to that. Corinne, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's one of the areas we're working on, to make sure that if they need more time, that we can get them more time before they actually get dismissed.
And do we know whether, here's another question, can employees work while receiving the CERB benefit?
No, I don't believe they can, but that's actually a good question that maybe we need to validate. Thinking it through. So it's a good question. So we'll have to get back to them on that one. So let's put that one aside and on it.
Yeah, great question. And that's actually, your questions are really helpful for us too, because as we get answers to these, and we'll be posting them, but we know what you need to know, so it's very helpful even if we don't have the answers. Another question, do I need to issue ROEs for employees to access the emergency benefit? They don't qualify for EI. Brendan, do you want to take that?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've been told no, that an ROE is not required for employees who intend to access the CERB fund. That said, there is legislation that states that if there's a break of employment of more than 1 week, so where an employee doesn't earn wages or earns less than 55% of their normal wages, we do have to submit an ROE. So that doesn't impact their ability to collect or to apply for the CERB fund. However, current regulations do still require you to file that ROE just to update Service Canada on the status of that employee.
Okay, and as an employer, do we file an ROE for ourselves?
Not usually, and this is because in most cases, employers won't be able to access EI regular benefits anyways, unless you've already registered for special benefits for the self-employed. But this is something you had already had to have done in the past, and that you have been paying into already. So even if you've been paying into regular EI, chances are you can't access it, and so you would not need to submit an ROE on your behalf. And again, you'd likely be accessing the CERB fund, which of course does not require an ROE anyways.
Okay, here's a good question, and I think this captures many questions that we've heard. We've temporarily closed our shop effective March 23rd to protect our employees, clients, and the community. We are allowed to be open, but thought it best to be closed. We laid off everyone. Do you think we might still be eligible for any assistance? So I guess there's two questions there, the business owner being eligible for assistance, but also the employees and their eligibility. I mean, they would go on EI. I'm assuming, I don't know whether there's anything you'd like to add to that, Brendan, but I'm guessing the question is also about the business owner, him or herself.
Yeah. So for temporary closures of your business, you would issue record of employment for all employees using code A as in Apple, which is a layoff due to shortage of work. And this will allow them to either apply for regular EI benefits, or if they're not eligible for regular EI benefits, they can apply for that CERB fund that we discussed. The owner themselves can also apply for the CERB fund. Now, in terms of supports for the business, you would not have access to the wage subsidy because you wouldn't be operating currently, and so you need to actually be operating your business to have access to that. I'd also like to mention that some provinces, and I'm going to use BC as a reference tool, have put in place emergency fund measures as well, wherein employees can apply for a non-repayable credit for $1,000 per month, as can business owners and the self-employed as well. So there's that added bonus. You can collect that while you're either collecting EI for your employees or while you personally are collecting on the CERB fund. Anything to add, Corinne?
No, I think you've covered it.
Great. So I'm going to, again, there are just way more questions than we're going to be able to get to today on this webinar, but we will be getting back to you. And I'm going to, before we close off, just go both to Corinne and Brendan to see if they have any final thoughts or any questions that they're getting a lot of that they want to touch on before we close off the webinar. And Corinne, I'll come to you first.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I think we're hopeful that this has been helpful to you. I wish we had more clear answers to many of your questions, but we will continue to try to get those answers for you as government rolls out some of these new measures that they've just introduced yesterday and today. I want you to know how important it is for us to hear from you, and how important it is for us to be able to share your stories and your feedback to government. It's very powerful what the information you're providing to us, because it's one of the only sources of good information government is getting about what's going on in the small business community now right across Canada. I also want you to know that we're here to help in any way that we can, and we will be here as long as it takes to help you get through this. And so I'll leave it at that for now, and just wish everybody the best of luck.
Thanks, Corinne. Brendan, did you have any last questions that you wanted to cover off, or last thoughts for the webinar participants?
Yeah, just a couple of final thoughts, and just to reinforce that our call volume is high. So what we're saying is absolutely bookmark our website, which is, in the COVID specific part, is CFIB-FCEI/COVID-19. That's updated not even daily, but hourly, and you'll get the most recent information there. If you can't find what you're looking for, even though we are extremely busy with call volume, we want to talk to you. We want to hear from you. So please do call into our business resources line. And even if we might not get back to you in our usual timelines, we will get back to you. You're important to us, and we do want to speak with you.
Great, thank you. I want to thank my colleagues for being on the call, and I want to thank all of you for everything you're doing at this very challenging time. We are heading into the weekend, so I do hope that everyone can take at least a little bit of time off, take a small break from the worry and from the news, and we will continue to be working hard to get you answers. As I mentioned earlier, we will be doing more webinars next week, and so as this evolves, the content of our webinars will evolve, and I imagine the questions that we're getting from you will evolve. If you have a few minutes to fill in our survey tonight or tomorrow, as that comes through to your email, be absolutely fabulous. As Corinne said, policymakers are very, very hungry for information on how they can best support business at this time, and we're working hard to make sure that they're getting that information straight from you as quickly as possible. And with that, I'm going to thank everyone, wish everyone a very nice weekend, and we'll end the webinar now.